All right, hi. So this video is about the framers' goals at the Constitutional Convention. The framers are also called the Founding Fathers, and they're the people who were the delegates to Philadelphia in 1787 and wrote the Constitution itself. And they had four major goals for the document that they were to create, or that they did create at the Constitutional Convention. The first, they wanted to create a strong national government. The governing document at the time, between the Declaration of Independence and the adoption of the Constitution, was called the Articles of Confederation. And that governing document had a very weak central government. There was no president, and the Congress consisted of a single vote for each state. And there were particular challenges with implementing those powers or that any legislation that Congress passed, because the states did not have to follow it if they didn't want to. Under the Articles, the federal government also could not tax. They also could not raise an army, and that was created a particular danger because we could not build up an economy and we could not create a safe, secure nation for the citizens. And so the founders wanted to rectify all of those weaknesses of the Articles, and in doing so created the new document, the Constitution, with a stronger national government that was able to do all of those things. That said, they still wanted to preserve states' rights for self-governance. The states were still able to retain their state sovereignty within their borders. They were able to retain their style of government. Governors headed the executive branch. The state legislatures continued as they had before. The state court systems were being set up at that time. And so states were permitted to create legislation as long as it did not conflict with what was in the Constitution. The founders also wanted to create a system of checks and balances, and they did a very exceptional job in creating an intricate system in which the different branches of government are checked and balanced by one another so that power is not concentrated too strongly or too heavily in one particular area. And that means that the different branches of government also must work together. For example, one of the most famous checks and balances, Congress is responsible for passing legislation. That's their job. And any bill that is going to be passed must go through the House and the Senate, so that's a check within itself. It's got to go through one house, and it's also got to go through a second house. After both houses agree on the content of the legislation, it is then sent to the president for that person's signature. Now, the president can, if the president likes the bill, sign the bill into law, and it will go into effect at a time at least 3 weeks out from the bill, and usually longer for significant legislation. But if the president thinks that there are problems with the bill, then he or she can veto the bill, and that is a balance on the check that's already gone through Congress. But there's another option. There's another possibility. After a veto, Congress can vote yet again, and if 2/3 of both houses, both the House and the Senate, agree, then the veto can be overturned, and the law would go into effect without the president's signature. That said, let's say the bill is vetoed and overturned and it goes into effect. A member of the public can feel that it violates their constitutional rights, and so they would take it through the court system. They would take it to, maybe eventually the Supreme Court would take up the case. And if the Supreme Court found that it was unconstitutional, they would overturn that piece of legislation. If they found that it did not violate the Constitution, then that wouldn't be a check or a balance there. Okay, so there are lots of options in the system for protecting the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution via checks and balances. And then last, the founders wanted to create a Republican form of government. Now, a Republican form of government in this sense does not mean the political party, although the political party eventually did take their name once it was created in the 1800s from this style of governance. A Republican form of government with a little r refers to the concept that decisions should come from the people. So the federal government was required to protect a Republican form of government for the public, and the state governments were as well. In our style of government, in our republic, this means elections. So we have the right to directly select many of the offices that will be representing us in both state governments and in the federal government. And so that must be, that was one of the major concerns that the framers had going into the Constitutional Convention. How would we make this system? And so in doing so, when they created that Republican form of government, they set up our new style of government called federalism. And this was an invention. No one had ever created federalism or utilized it before. And so this was something that the founders came up with at that time in 1787. Ultimately, the 13 states all ratified the Constitution by 1789. It had been in effect by 1788 because the requisite number of states had ratified by that time. And we'd had a presidential election, and President Washington had already been elected. But the Constitutional Convention set forth these goals in order to create this style of government. They were very particular about how they wanted the Constitution to be read. They wanted it to be something that could be interpreted over time in case we wanted to keep it. The shelf life of most constitutions is about 20 to 40 years. And that's because they are written for the times specifically, and the founders thought that that was a bad idea. They did not want to have to revisit and have a new constitutional convention every couple of decades. Although they did put in the Constitution a way to do that if the public decided that's what we want to do. But they decided to write it in a way that it would be timeless, so they wrote using vague language so it could be interpretable, and they added the process of amending the document, and so we can add new rights to it as we see fit to add those new rights to it. And that is all part of federalism, which is in the Chapter 3 videos.